Greetings and welcome to another tale of Arrested Development called Genre Grinder. I'm your host, Gabe, and today I am joined once again by Betsy Jorgensen. Say hello, Betsy.
Hello.
If you remember, Betsy had a podcast called Your Favorite Monsters. Are you still doing that?
Technically, sort of, yes. We
Okay.
are planning on coming back for the Clone High reboot.
All right, that's coming soon.
Yeah, they've started to release episodes, and we are going to come back and cover that when it's all out.
So what Betsy and Blake's podcast was covering Scooby-Doo, which is sort of horror for kids. So I had the idea that the two of us could talk about horror for kids. So today we'll be acting as your underpaid and underprepared substitute teachers, and we'll be watching children's films all day. In an effort to avoid covering too many obvious and famous titles, because I don't like doing that. We talked about the idea that these are scary movies made for young audiences, not Gremlins, Poltergeist, Beetlejuice, for some examples, which I think are ostensibly horror movies and horror comedies that are made for grown-ups but feature kids, and some of them were sold to children, but I don't really think of those as kids movies. Those are just movies that kids are kind of part of. And then there are movies like Fright Night and all the versions of It and Silver Bullet, lots of Stephen King stuff actually, which are R-rated horror movies, and they just again happen to feature kids. And then the other idea is that I wanted to avoid children's movies that are not horror movies but have one or two really scary scenes in them that we all kind of remember. So not necessarily like scenes that traumatized us as kids, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and The Secret of Nim are two I always come to that are, neither one is a horror movie, but they are kids movies that have a scary part. And then what I would call the quintessential children's horror film of my childhood, Return to Oz. I already covered with Tyler Foster on our Legacy sequel podcast. So I will try to remember to link that with the description for this podcast so that people can listen to that if they want to hear thoughts on that. But all that said, it's always hard to stick to these rules. So ultimately, there are a couple movies that I just personally really wanted to talk about because I either saw them as a kid or discovered them as an adult and wish more people would have seen them. There was one movie that Betsy had wanted to cover, and there's going to be one movie that neither of us had seen before this that I had just heard was a good example of this. So this is definitely not an all-encompassing look at the subject.
And to be honest, there was one movie that you hard vetoed.
Wait, which one did I hard veto? I can't remember now.
Little Monsters.
Oh, right, because even as a child, I hated Little Monsters. But I think we'll have a place to talk about Little Monsters.
Yeah, I just, I have to throw in the dig early.
Well, yeah, Little Monsters. There was two movies that came out kind of near each other: Little Monsters and Drop Dead Fred, which I really disliked as a child, but are now considered kind of cult classics. But like as a kid, they both really bothered me.
Yeah, Drop Dead Fred. I think we could get into the like more discussion about whether that one's actually a horror movie or whether that's like a gross out comedy.
Yeah.
Little Monsters is like both gross out comedy, but also like a legit horror movie.
Yeah.
But again, we could talk about it a bit later. But that was the one that you were like, no, we're not watching that.
No, I don't want. I
feel
like watching that movie. One again.
Yeah.
I think another one I would have vetoed, but you thankfully didn't bring up, was a Garbage Pail Kids movie, which is just one of the most revolting, hard to watch things in the entire world. I've seen it as an adult, trying to give it a second chance, and it's just so difficult to watch.
That's fair. I didn't think about it, and I wouldn't have wanted to watch it, so we're good.
But so what's funny is we're going to do this in a release order, like I like to. This is mostly 80s stuff. But the first movie I picked kind of falls in this category of not very good movie that I just have fond memories of. So right off the bat, we're in a little bit of my veto has backfired because I made Betsy watch something weird that's not very good. And that is the Peanut Butter Solution from 1985. Quick backstory on the Peanut Butter Solution. It's directed by Michael Rubbo, RUBBO. And this was a movie my mother rented to me when I was homesick and just saw on the shelf and said, sure, let's rent this videotape. And I didn't know at the time, but it was actually part of a Canadian TV series of our TV movie series called Tales for All. And it was really French Canadian, technically. It was produced by Les Productions Lafette. This includes, the whole series includes The Christmas Martian from 1971, which was retroactively added to the series. The Dog That Stopped the War from 1984. This movie. Bach and Broccoli from 1986. The Young Magician from 1987. The Great Land of Small from 1987. Tadpole and the Whale from 1987. Tommy Tricker and the Stamp Traveler, which was from 1988 and also directed by Rubbo. The Summer of the Colt from 89. Bye Bye Red Riding Hood from 89. The Case of the Witch Who Wasn't from 90. Vincent and Me from 90, also directed by Rubbo. Reach for the Sky, 94. The Flying Sneaker, I'm going to stop with the dates. The Clean Machine. The Return of Tommy Tricker. Whiskers, Dancing on the Moon. Hatai, The Hidden Fortress, no relation to the Kurosawa movie. My Little Devil. Regina. Summer with the Ghosts. Cargo to Africa. The Outlaw League. And then just this year, there was a sort of reboot with Coco Ferme or Ferme. I'm not good with French. Of all these, I've only ever heard of Peanut Butter Solution, and Vincent and Me was one that I believe I watched during PE and a rainy day or something like that. That was like sort of educational one about Vincent van Gogh. But I mean, these were Canadian exclusive. They were released on DVD with no English audio or subtitles. They were dubbed in both English and French. But this one movie kind of escaped, and a bunch of Gen X and millennial adults also stumbled across it, and it kind of became a cult thing and has had a Blu-ray release by Severin Films since. So I kind of wanted to revisit it, even though I had already revisited it as an adult, because I was like, what was this thing? Did I just make this up? And it's ultimately not very good on most levels, which you would judge a movie good or bad. But it's so singular and audaciously weird that I think it was ultimately worth watching. But I can't speak for you in this regard.
I mean, it is very after school
Yeah.
movie experience. I am not sure I would have. It was not better than, say, a Goosebumps
Yeah.
episode, which is damning it with the faintest praise I think I could say. It just, I think, like, as we were watching it, like, literally nobody had pacing.
Yes.
Everybody was all over the place. We were tossing back the idea that they didn't have a script, a plot, or any idea what they were doing, and they just let the kids kind of do whatever and put together the scenes with what they got.
Well, now that I know that it was actually filmed to be shown in French with English speaking actors,
Mm.
that part kind of makes a little bit more sense how weird the dialogue was, because they were kind of just planning on putting it all in later anyway. It couldn't have helped things that it was made to be in French but filmed with sound in English. I should try to describe I think that what it comes down to is you're absolutely right. It is like an episode of Goosebumps, but it is so weird. Whereas Goosebumps has this sort of logic to, like, yeah, it would be scary if the refrigerator ate you, or there was a monster in your closet. I've never read Goosebumps. So I'm just guessing what happens I know that there's a killer doll. That stuff kind of makes sense. Whereas this
I
is
mean,
just like stuff thrown against a wall.
okay, if you've actually never read Goosebumps, you actually have to step off a little bit. R.L. Stine does craft a very, if formulaic, good set of, like, okay, here are your horror beats, here's where your twist comes in. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's absolutely not Shakespeare or
No.
anything,
I don't
but
mean it's bad. I mean that it makes sense, is what I'm saying. Like
oh, yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
pattern
no.
to what to expect from that.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely formulaic, but it's a step off the formula that you might be expecting. Like,
Mhm.
he does a very good job with it. This is
It just
this is
keeps
nothing.
it just keeps going.
This
So,
is nothing.
well, one thing that we were going to try to do is discuss like how these movies deal with common childhood fears. And
Yeah.
so this one gets off on the idea that there is a missing parent. And
Yes.
I'm going to do my best with the plot here. In this one, the mom has gone from Canada to Australia because her father died. But in the context of the movie, it really feels like there was a version of the script where she was dead because of the way that the dad has no idea how to care for them. And this slightly older sister has taken over all domestic roles, um,
Yes.
taking care of her slightly younger brother, or maybe even older brother. I'm not even sure what their relationship is, and her dad, and doing the cleaning. And there's actually a pretty good joke where they cut from one scene to another, and she's on an old computer with a calculator trying to do family finance and taxes. That was kind of a good gag.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good.
So that's there's that basic fear of abandonment, and that's something we're going to see in a lot of these. Excuse me. But then the plot goes into a different kind of fear, which is hobos, I suppose. Is the which, growing up in the 80s, there was a sort of fear of
The
strangers,
stranger danger.
and they
Yeah.
were often represented as sort of stereotypical hobos, or traveling homeless people,
Yeah. Like the transient. Yes.
transient older people with bindles and beards and
I mean,
hats with a hole in it.
if you think of like Home Alone,
Yeah,
um the pigeon lady,
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind
that
of, yeah.
exactly.
The stereotypical homeless person with ragged clothes and artful dirt.
Or like the I don't remember what they're called, but in the movie Peach Dragon, the sort of family that,
Yeah.
yeah, which was actually a
Oh,
recurring nightmare when I was a kid, that I got abducted by the transient family from Peach Dragon.
there's a very tramps.
Tramps, yes.
Yes. Like
Not the
there's a,
fun dog kind, the scary bindle carrying kind. So
um
anyway, our main character Michael and his friend Connie go to an abandoned building where there had just been, and this is casually said, there had been a huge fire and it burned down, and the hobos sleeping inside had died. And
yeah.
Connie and Michael kind of dare each other to go in. And Michael goes in, he sees something so terrifying that the next morning all his hair falls out. And then the bulk of the movie is about how crappy it is to have no hair. I think that is a there's a metaphor there that I can't quite place. It might be, it's not really a cancer metaphor, but it's sort of like an illness metaphor. It's
Well,
definitely,
it's either an illness metaphor or it's even just the, isn't it so crappy to be different?
yeah. And
Like, there is just the, isn't it so crappy to have a difference that you can't hide and everybody makes fun of you for?
yeah. And he, I mean, he's really very dramatic about
Oh
the
my
whole thing.
god.
And again, his dad is totally ill prepared to deal with any of this. His dad is this artist who is can't he's like this perfect stereotype of a tortured artist who has all these paintings he could sell, but he'd rather just sell the ones he doesn't like, so he's not making any money. He has all these increasingly silly paintings of dogs in human clothing, or birds. Sorry,
Yeah.
not dogs. Birds dressed in human
Birds?
clothing.
Oh yeah. And doing things like playing tennis.
Yeah. So there's this painting he's done of his family that he refuses to sell, that his dealer swears can make him $15,000 in 1985 money. And the villain, who is set up early, who I dared Betsy to guess who the main antagonist was going to be after he had been introduced, and she had no idea because there's almost no way to guess. But the ongoing villain for the movie is a eccentric and abusive art teacher with a really thick, goofy French accent, who is refusing to let his kids express any sort of imagination. He wants them to do 100% realistic art. So
However, I guessed the hobo, and I was kind of right.
kind of.
Because he pretends to be the hobo later.
Yes. Well, and in this the thing I didn't get and had to read later is that it is apparently that they are brothers, even though they all have two completely different accents. The teacher, there is the dealer, the dad's dealer, who has a German accent, and one of the hobos are apparently all brothers.
Yes, because they say it in one of the scenes, and you're like, wait, they're brothers? I was like, they just said it
They just,
2
yeah, but
minutes ago.
that I couldn't. I've seen this movie maybe 3 times now, and I still couldn't grasp this
You're
idea
like,
because it
wait,
doesn't make
what?
sense. Why
No,
they
it
all have
doesn't make
different.
any sense. But like when the character just says it and you're like, no, I'm like, you can't say that to a character, especially in a children's movie, who
Yeah.
just is like, well, that's my brother and that's my other brother. All of us are brothers. You can't then tell them, no. A, they can't hear you, Gabe. And B, the kids will believe them.
Of course.
They don't understand
Well,
that that's nonsense.
it is a sort of childlike nonsense where all of the adults have insane accents. And well, and so this teacher gets fired because he's a prick and really mean. He's especially mean to Connie, actually, more mean to Connie than Michael. And in the middle of the night, Michael is visited by the ghosts of the dead hobos, who give him the formula for something that will help him grow his hair back. And the last ingredient is peanut butter, hence the name Peanut Butter Solution. It actually takes 2 scenes for him to get it correct, because his sister and dad rightfully take it away from him before he can drink this horrible stuff. They think he's going to drink it. He's actually going to put it on his head, but they take it away and flush it down the toilet. But it does
Because
work.
they have
And
kitty litter in it
yeah,
and like
I think bird poop was one of
bird droppings, kitty litter, turpentine,
yeah.
all of this stuff. It's definitely poisonous.
Yeah, but they don't understand he's going
And
to put it on his head like a normal person.
yeah, and it's probably caustic,
Yeah.
but and the tone of the ghosts is very much like, this is probably also going to kill you.
Yeah, especially there's a male and a female, and the woman is really mean. Um
Yeah. And
which
the guy isn't super nice either.
no,
Like
he's yeah.
they are they're like I would have not been surprised, like as an adult, watching this movie, that if like those ghosts had been evil and this was actually a lesson in be careful about who you believe.
No,
Like if this was an actual stranger danger movie.
yeah, and when you say that, and my memories of watching it the first time when I was homesick is that was my assumption, and I found them very frightening, even though they're sort of meant to be silly ghosts, and we're not even sure if they are ghosts. They might just be in his imagination. But that was definitely my reaction as a 6 or 7 year old, however old I was. That I was like, no, you should not trust these people. Don't put this shit on your head. And of course it turns out bad, because then his hair won't stop growing, so he has another problem that makes him an outsider.
Yeah. Well, they tell him only use a very little bit of it.
And he just
Um
slathers it on.
and then he's like, "Well, it's working. I should disregard this thing they said and use as much of it as possible." And so it goes overboard.
And well, actually, there's a longer version. I didn't mean to, but we watched the shorter version, which is technically the American cut that was on VHS, so the one I would have watched as a kid. But there is a longer version that I saw since, where some of the stuff that they thought wasn't appropriate for kids was deleted. And there's this sort of deleted subplot that Connie puts some of it on his genital, or on his pubis, because he wants pubic hair, and it starts growing out of control out of his pants. But Connie overcomes the problem by just yelling at it to stop, and then it stops. Whereas Michael's hair won't stop growing, and he sort of becomes like hypnotized and like drained of energy, like it's taking something out of him. There's some sort of funny scenes where it's absurdly funny scenes where Connie can't pay attention in class because all he does in class now is constantly cut Michael's hair. And so the teachers all threaten to resign if they don't kick Michael out of school, which I did find that funny. And I was pretty sure that was supposed to be a joke, but it also might have just been one of those adults are jerks type situations that they kind of wrote into the whole thing. But
Yeah.
anyway, the evil teacher who has been fired discovers that Michael's hair won't stop growing, kidnaps him, ties him into a machine, and then starts kidnapping all the other kids in town and creates a factory to make paintbrushes, which I can tell you as a painter are the worst paintbrushes imaginable because they're so floppy, but they're magical paintbrushes, which it just adds a whole nother. So not only is there the kidnapping fear thing, but this sort of slavery fear thing going on, and this exploitation, there's definitely like it really goes into the stranger danger thing to the everybody in town's being kidnapped and the adults aren't really doing anything about it.
Yeah, it definitely kind of goes chitty chitty bang bang
Mm-hmm.
with the whole like kid catcher kind of thing
Yeah.
and then putting him to work, and only painter dad cares, but
Yeah.
he's useless.
Yeah, he's trying, but he just he can't manage anything.
Yeah.
um
And it's again wildly varying tone
well,
and
I think like I said, there's a when we were watching this one together, we watched this one together, and I said there's like a pedophile undercurrent here, and you brought up that it was definitely a satanic panic kind
yeah.
of situation, which was all very similar to the sort of uh, moral crisis we're going through lately with queer
Yeah.
people. There was this whole Satanists are taking our children and kidnapping them and doing horrible things to them was all it was thing in the 80s. So
Mhm.
and and there's sort of a again I feel like, and there's not much information available. I could have bought the Blu-ray and listened to the commentary, and I didn't go that far. But there's a lot of, I feel like they're satirizing elements of this, and it's just coming across really weird. But I'm not sure if that was the intent or not. Like
Sometimes
it gets
you
really
do such a
surrealistic.
bad job
Yeah, it gets
that,
really
like,
surreal as it goes
in
on.
your editing, you try to pass it off as satire
Hmm.
because you're trying so hard to make anything of it.
I mean, like
And
stuff like the pubes growing out of the kids' shoes, that's clearly supposed to be funny, though, everything about it, even though it's like a body horror situation.
yeah.
They're playing that for laughs. So trying to go off the tone of that, knowing that's supposed to be funny, I was trying to apply that to other weird things about the movie to try to figure out. But like you say, the tone is really hard to judge.
Well, and then you get to the end where they're like, so, they rescue the kids and they say that he lost his hair because he saw something so terrible.
Yeah.
And they just are like, "Oh, what he saw was a bunch of dead bodies.
Yeah.
He must have just seen piles of corpses."
Well,
And
and
you're
then
like, "Wow. Okay.
and
Huh."
and it's sort of implied that the ghost scared him that way on purpose, and then but then they gave him the peanut butter solution anyway. But it does end with him confronting the ghost and saying, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." And it's a little weird considering that the ghost helped him earlier. It's another weird tonal thing, like you're not
Yeah, like
sure.
they
Maybe
didn't
the idea is
really.
supposed to be that he should have instead of asking for the peanut butter solution, he should have just talked to the ghosts, and then the problem would have been solved. I don't know.
Yeah. Again, when you are trying, you sometimes you make a bad thing. And you try a whole bunch of different stuff and you just try to make something at the end and you're like, "No, this is satire." Or this was supposed to be funny
Yeah.
or something. And no, sometimes you just did it bad.
Yeah, and I mean, according to the IMDb factoids, it was based on a bedtime story that Michael Rubbo used to tell his 6-year-old, and you can see that. but I imagine the kid fell asleep before he had to deal with any sort of actual character development or plot elements. It almost has this Roald Dahl storybook logic. And again, the last part's really weird, where like all the kids who have been kidnapped are wearing sort of pink geese, and they're sort of living in a void. It's like a black void, and they get out by tricking the evil art professor to paint something because it's so realistic you can walk into it, and they trick him into going and getting frightened by the burned dead hobo camp thing.
Oh yeah, he because the teacher was like, never paint from imagination, only paint from reality. Imagination is garbage. Um then he uses his magic paintbrush to paint something that really happened, the building that burned down.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to look at whatever was in the building, which was, as we mentioned before, piles of dead bodies, including his brother. Then he loses all his hair, which passes the hair losing curse onto him. But then also the kid goes in to look at the bodies too to say he's not scared of them anymore. So it's broken in like two different ways. But then also, that's enough that he confesses all of his crimes to the police.
Yes.
But also, as long as he can take his dog to jail.
Yeah, he loves his dog. That's like his redeeming quality is he loves his dog.
Yep. And
Uh,
I'm like, okay.
I mean, I feel like the more logical thing is he paints something so realistic that the kids can just run away. And like I've seen the movie before, and that was what in my memory happened is like, oh, they has them paint the thing, and then the kids just walk out of it onto the street and are free. I forgot that it's all a ruse to get him to get scared instead. Anyway,
Again, bad.
this it does feature I cannot remember the actor's name right now, but there's a guy from the 2004 Battlestar Galactica is in this. It is a completely different character. The bald guy from Battlestar Galactica is in this as the dad, which was kind of funny. But the real claim to fame here, celebrity wise, is that this movie features two English language performances from a younger Celine Dion, and it was actually the first ever English recording she ever made was for this movie. So that's sort of like maybe the thing keeping it alive outside of cult outside of cult audiences is that Celine Dion has very ardent fans. So maybe the soundtrack sells out in
You
like
know,
Quebec.
maybe.
Maybe
It's, I mean, it is watchable. It's just not good.
it's just so weird. It just keeps doing what you have no idea that would be where you would go with the story, and I kind of like something about that. And it really watching it as a grown up, even much later after watching as a grown up a second time, I still understand why it freaked me out so much as a kid. It's very lightly considered. I would very light considering this a horror movie. It definitely has um the ghosts and stuff like that, and so it is a horror movie, but a lot of the scary stuff is I think not intended to be as scary as it is.
Yeah, no, I
maybe
agree.
maybe it's just the idea that it's so out of control. Maybe that's what makes it so frightening is that it's unpredictable.
I mean, if we're going to talk about like what makes it a horror movie rather than the things that we kind of discounted as horror movies in other ways, like there is a supernatural element. We
Hmm.
do have the ghosts that come in, but like we have a loss of control of the main characters.
Hmm.
We have um we have an antagonist that has genuine malice towards the main characters. And we have like with that genuine loss of control and like that invokes fear and terror, they don't get that back through like action. They have to solve it through means of like cleverness and or um problem solving, which I feel like especially in kids movies, that's really where you're going to like start finding kids horror.
Yeah.
You have to have your child protagonist really overcome a situation of fear through non-physical means, because otherwise then you just have a peril-filled action movie.
Yeah, it's like a different genre.
Yeah.
Well, and that's actually a really good segue into the second movie,
Mhm.
which does all that well. I haven't actually talked to you since you watched Paperhouse 1988, but rewatching this, which was a one movie that I discovered as an adult, I think this is a fantastic example of a really smart movie that's made for kids, but I don't know if kids really would like it. It was 100% made for them, and it's sort of weird to me that this barely has even a DVD release in the US, while the Peanut Butter Solution has this cult following. I had never even heard of it for many years. It is British, that's part of the problem, but it's the major feature debut of Bernard Rose, the director Bernard Rose, who would go on to direct Candyman, in part due to the fact that Paperhouse was so well received.
Mm.
And you can see the germs of Candyman, what he did with Candyman,
Yeah,
uh,
no, I can
which is
see that.
different than the story, the Clive Barker story. And you can see why Barker would have appreciated this particular movie. But it's a really virtuoso direction. Like it's like directed by a guy who's maybe afraid he's never going to be able to direct again, so he's got to like really show off.
Yeah.
Um, and it's full of visual nods to fine art. The main character Anna has a book of Picasso, and there's this dream logic to it, and she enters the dream world, and it's a reference to the Andrew Wyeth painting Christina's World, which is the one with the girl in the field with her back to the viewer.
Mhm.
um, and it's called Paperhouse because there's this set that is basically, it's about entering a drawing, and the set they've made for the paper house, which goes through all sorts of changes, is just this perfect kind of combination of expressionism and what an actual kid's drawing would look like, but then it's shot really gothically. And I think that ties into the sort of gothic street art that you see in Candyman. So even if you're not into the idea of kid friendly horror movie, I think that people, so before we even get into the plot, people really if you like Candyman, this is a movie to watch to see the sort of building blocks of that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also is one of the earliest scores by Hans Zimmer. He's credited as co-writing the music with Stanley Myers, but in actuality, he rewrote all of Myers's music because the score was rejected. So there's it's just a shared. The part of the deal was they would share credit, but it's really, I guess, all Hans Zimmer, and then classical bits. And then the cast includes American actress Glenn Headley, um, who had just been in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and was about to be in Dick Tracy, and she's
Oh,
really really good.
that's where I recognize her
Yes, you
from.
recognize her from Dick Tracy. Tess
I was like,
Trueheart.
yeah, I was like, I recognize her from someplace, but like, I
It's
could not place her.
the problem is that she has a British accent in the movie, and apparently they actually recorded all her lines with an American accent, and then they decided it didn't fit, so she re-recorded, so all of her lines are dubbed by herself in a British accent. So it does
Oh,
create a
okay.
little bit of a disconnect, but I think it's a really good performance. I would put her point of view in this, I would put in line with the Babadook, the mother and the Babadook, where is a troubled child and it is a single parent. Again, we have another situation where one parent is missing, and there's a single parent trying to deal with a troubled child, a child with a problem. It's not to the degree of the Babadook, where that kid has some sort of developmental disorder going on, whereas this girl is upset about her father being absent, and comes down with a sickness. So it's not quite as intense as that, but I think that there's
But
sort
at the
of like,
same, but there are like distinct similarities
yeah,
because the illness like ramps things up so much.
Right.
So like there are Babadook-esque, because like the girl becomes fairly unlikable.
Yeah, I mean, that is the issue with the Babadook for a lot of people, is the kid is so intense that you
Uh-huh.
can't watch the movie even. And I understand that. I can understand that. But yeah, this is a
I
case
mean, I
where
like the Babadook, but
I
like
love the
I also
Babadook.
hate that guy.
And
I
the
think.
thing I love about the Babadook is that they successfully make the kid the hero in the very last act, like the climax.
Yeah.
Like I
No, it's
love that.
true. Like
Whereas this is a
you
case we're meant to identify with this girl, and it's very in the style of all those British school movies from the era. It kind of reminded me of, we watched Penda's Fen together, you and I, that was part of that
Yeah.
Severin Films set. It was not as fucked up as that movie, but it's
Mhm.
similar in that the culture of English school, like, she's not in a boarding school, but it's still part of this culture that like you get as an American watching things like this. It's definitely, that will actually come up. We're going to talk about a Japanese film later, and that comes up there. But there's sort of, it's sort of akin to that too. But I should say, so the plot is, it's based on a 1958 book called Marianne's Dreams by Catherine Storr, and that had been adapted into radio plays, TV shows, and a 6-episode miniseries called Escape into the Night from 1972. That Wikipedia assures me was very true to the book. And there's also opera and other stage versions. This one is not as strict to the book, but apparently people who read the book really like the way they dealt with it. And so there's this kind of misfit girl named Anna, who really is our protagonist, unlike Babadook, where the boy is not our protagonist, the mom is. And she's already having trouble in school, and her father is gone. We later find out that he was an alcoholic, and he's trying to they're sort of separated. Her parents are sort of separated, but he's off doing, quote, like work stuff. But she comes down with this mysterious fever, which I don't think they ever say in the movie, but is supposed to be mononucleosis.
Oh.
So I don't know. I looked, that's what it said in various descriptions. So maybe in the book they describe it as mononucleosis. So something that could kill a child, but is not super unusual. It's not great, but it's not that bad. But hers just kind of gets worse. I'm sure it would be a much worse disease in 1958 than 1986 or 88.
Yeah.
But that, maybe that's why they don't say it's mono, because it wouldn't seem as serious. But she passes out and oversleeps, and she dreams about this house she's been drawing. But in the dream, a boy named Mark, who is unable to walk, lives in the house. And so every time she passes out, she visits Mark, and she keeps trying to do things to help Mark. Like, she draws him legs, but they don't work because that's not how it works. And she tries to draw him radios, but they make no sense because she's a child drawing a radio. But she discovers that her home call doctor, that Mark is a real boy with muscular dystrophy, is being cared for by the same doctor. So he's like a real kid who's being pulled into her imagination. And her trying to protect him works for a while, but then she gets frustrated and draws her estranged father into the house, thinking that her father can pick him up, but she just can't draw her father not drunk. And his likeness gets messed up, and it sort of turns him into this monster. And that's where the horror movie parts come in, is that there's this sort of faceless version of her dad now hunting her and Mark within this house. And in the real world, she keeps getting sicker, so she keeps getting stuck in the paper house for longer periods of time, where it's kind of representing her, kind of, she's kind of in a limbo between life and death, and that's what gets her stuck in the paper house. And I guess I don't really want to say how it ends, because I think it's a really, it might go on maybe a little too long. I could see an argument that it sort of goes on.
Yeah, I think it could have done with a little bit of trimming, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not a long
um
movie, but it could have been shorter.
I mean, part of that is any kind of like great intensity with children. Like if it goes even just like a couple minutes too long, it's really hard to hold intensity with children.
Well,
Um
especially if you're doing a movie that's ultimately aimed at children, you can't. In an adult movie, you can crank up the intensity. You can actually kill a child in an adult movie,
yeah, but
but
like you
there's like
can kill a
rules
child.
here. Yeah.
You can kill a child in an adult movie, but if you don't earn it, you've lost
Yeah.
your audience. But both child actors, depending on how good they are, these child actors were great.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the Peanut Butter
but
Solution actors are just fine. I think they're being badly directed. I
they
think
were
that
being,
girl has some acting chops that she
oh
just,
yeah,
but no,
yeah,
these two kids are great.
these two kids were great. But like even these great kids can only sustain intensity
Hmm.
so long before it doesn't work.
Hmm.
And you, as an audience member watching kids of this age dealing with intensity, it needs to have a break in it before something else needs to happen. Um, Otherwise, like, you lose it with kids. Like,
Yeah.
you can kill a kid in a movie. Like, that's perfectly fine and reasonable. Where
Yeah.
I'll watch horror movies here.
Yeah.
But, like, it turns into a different kind of movie.
Right.
And it definitely isn't going to be like this, like, tight, meditation on everything it had been doing before that point if you keep like dialing out what it was doing. That's again why I think it probably needed to be just a little shorter.
Well, and it's walking a fine line because it really is. I can see someone argue me that this is a case of a movie for adults that happens to star kids, but I really do think this is a movie aimed at children, but it's aimed at this weird early adolescence, which is just a strange time for kids where they're sort of children but sort of teenagers. So it's like that's a hard thing to express in a movie authentically, and I think it tries really hard to express that and be on the kids level and deal with imagination but also sort of reality. It has it covers, I mean, like if we're going to talk about the childhood fears, there's a cavalcade in this one. Illness, obviously, which was a big one for
Hmm.
me as a kid. I
Oh
was
yeah.
definitely a hypochondriac kid. But what's interesting is how she's young enough that she approaches illness with frustration in the beginning, which is something that children actually do when they're like
Oh
chronically ill
yeah.
and mortally ill children are at first pissed off that they can't do things,
Oh
and
yeah.
then they get afraid of dying. But that's not really, yeah, it's not that kind of fear for them, and I think they do that really well.
Yeah. And the reason that I think that this is, I agree with you that this is a kids movie and not an adult movie with kid actors is how she reacts to the other child.
Hmm.
Um
She goes, it takes it in stride. It's like, oh, there's a kid who lives in my imaginary house. I gotta
and
he's
like,
he's my
yeah,
friend now, and I gotta help him.
he's my friend. I've got to help him. I want to know more about him. But like, it isn't, oh, there's this weird kid and I need to like there's a mystery about him. It's this creepy child who's there who I'm getting drip fed a mystery
Hmm.
about. Like in a movie like based towards adults, that would be like much more of a, I'm keeping a secret friend from my mom, and like this is a whole thing going here, rather than like this is just a thing that's happening, there's another boy here, I'm figuring stuff out, like this is all like adding to my life in a different way. Like it's all about how the world opens up to her and how the frustrations and things affect her life.
Yes. It's very
Um,
it's funny because I actually remembered the abusive father being his dad. I hadn't seen it in like 10 years, and I remembered her trying to help him escape his dad. But what it really is that she has got him stuck in a situation where her fears about her dad are affecting him now. And we
yeah.
don't know anything about his family at all. Um Other than I mean, he gets put in the hospital. We don't know anything about his family. Yeah, I'm thinking about it, and there's nothing. And also rewatching it, I realized that her dad isn't necessarily an abusive father. He's just abandoned them and has is an alcoholic. So it's really her version of him, her. And there's something great later in the movie when the dad reappears that she basically tells him flat out, I can't trust you yet, you need to give me space. And he sort of goes, okay, I guess that's fair. um which is something I really appreciated. I don't, the peanut butter solution, the mom comes back and everybody's happy again. There's again, it's an authentic thing. The way kids deal with that kind of abandonment is that
Mhm.
they can be excited for their dad to be back, but then still be like, in my brain you were abusive even if you weren't. Like there's just something, it's a lot, it's a lot going on, it's a lot.
Yeah,
A consistently bittersweet movie, um
yeah.
which I
Like
think if I would have seen it as a kid, that would have been what affected me the most.
yeah, like it it had a lot, you know,
There,
it reminded me a lot of, absolutely not a horror movie, but The Secret Garden.
yeah, it's got that kind of
And part of that is very much the, like, you know, a young girl finds a secret friend
yeah, and a magical
and in a
realm.
magical place, um and like has to figure out how this like affects her life and kind of things. Like I had some kind of like Secret Garden flashbacks for this whole thing.
Well,
But like,
and it's not like the Alice in Wonderland logic where it's an adventure.
yeah,
It's not an
like
adventure. It's life. It's like, how am I
uh-huh.
going to live this?
Yeah, like Alice in Wonderland, everyone has seen plenty at this point stories about how Alice in Wonderland becomes a horror story very easily
Yeah.
because Alice in Wonderland is horrific. And the reason, like, Alice in Wonderland is very scary.
Yes.
And the reason that Alice in Wonderland isn't a horror story is Alice's attitude towards Wonderland.
Yeah.
It's filled with wonders. That's the name.
I mean, honestly, I think it's one of the most malleable story. I would love to do a genre grinder someday about Alice in Wonderland adaptations. I think it's a wonderful basis for any story, and there are a lot of them, like Pan's Labyrinth, which are basically horror adventures.
I
Um,
mean, if you're really just going down that rabbit hole, you're really just talking about Portal Fantasy.
yeah,
And
and I
then you're
love that stuff.
just, yeah, I mean, then you're just going through like the folklore.
And
Um,
it's also a metaphor, or at least thematically, about a young girl's adolescence. But it's just Paperhouse and Secret Garden, I think, if I'm remembering Secret Garden well enough, do approach it differently. It's not,
oh, absolutely.
and that
Um,
is an interesting distinction.
it has been a long time with me for Secret Garden, and I'm barely sure it's very strongly just polio
Hmm.
because the young boy in there is in a wheelchair, and the reason he has a secret garden is he is in this garden because he has polio and she's there because of the war. And she sneaks into the garden and then makes friends, but like there's a stern governor governess, I don't remember, but that's the whole, like, you have a secret friend, your world becomes bigger, things happen, it's a musical.
Yeah, this is
Things are
definitely not a musical.
this is definitely not a musical.
I mean, I think that I mean, there is one good jump scare in this movie,
Hmm.
um, and the scene where she's kind of hiding from her faceless dad clone is definitely a horror scene. But yeah, it's more about the idea, this sort of existential threat of this illness, and the fact that Mark is definitely dying, and if she dies she can't help Mark. Like that's really where the scariness comes from. But it's so much casual melancholy. It's something that's actually in Return to Oz, now that I think about it. Like Return to Oz has the Wheelers and the sand that turns you into sand and fucking Mombi's severed heads. But
Hmm.
I think what really scared me about Wizard of Oz is just the sort of casualness about the Gump, I think his name is, the Gump, just and the pumpkin guy, just kind of knowing they're gonna die and that they don't have long to live and that they're both rotting, literally rotting. Like that stuff would really get to me, that sort of existential dread.
Yeah.
And I think this movie is less dreadful, again, more bittersweet. The ending is, again, it might go on like 2 scenes too long, but the ending is really quite good,
Mhm.
as far as that sort of, something we didn't talk about because they're just such popular movies, so I didn't really want to talk about them, but stuff like Coraline and Kubo and Paranorman, is that these are all movies that are helping children deal with the idea of death.
Yeah.
And I think this falls in that category, but um definitely treats it a little more harshly than those ones are kind of like, death is kind of fun in the end. It's like this one's a little more harsh about the idea of death, but I don't know, I
Well,
think
I
it's a
also think, well, you get different generations of children having to deal with death in different ways.
mm-hmm,
So, like, Kubo, Paranorman, uh, Coraline are dealing with our more, our newer generation of children who are dealing in our modern era, who are a bit more sanitized to the idea of death
mm-hmm.
and introducing a lot of kids to the idea that maybe death isn't so scary and it's okay. Where you get back to the 80s and like there is the threat of nuclear devastation everywhere, and
Yeah,
you've got a lot of people around you who are scared of dying all the time, and maybe that's okay, and you're also going to have some existential dread,
yeah,
and kids also are dealing with that. And so, like, kids horror is also going to be reflecting the kinds of attitudes about death that kids are going to have to be dealing with. So, like, dealing with a kids horror, attitude about death of the generation of the child who's going to be, watching it is also something.
yeah.
Um, we don't just have one attitude about death. So,
I mean, again, it's a movie for adults, but another kind of adolescent death thing that reminded me of this, maybe because of the schoolgirl part, is Peter Jackson's Heavenly Creatures, which isn't quite a horror movie and it's definitely for adults, but is also about this sort of period in adolescence when you just can't
is
quite
that the
control
one
yourself.
with
Melanie Lewinsky and
the
Kate
two?
Winslet.
Yeah, was thinking of. I realize that one's an adult one
Yeah,
about adolescence
and a
and not
real true
for
story too.
and a real true story. Both of those, but I almost did bring it up for this.
Yeah, it has.
Um,
There's something about it. It's not. It's different, but there's something. Well, I guess they have their
I
dream world
think
too. They have their clay figure dream world, which is,
the clay figure dream world, and I think it is because it's a true story.
yeah. And this
Like,
one feels like it could be a true story. It's,
yeah,
even with the
like,
paper house.
but it is very much not a kids movie, and
Yeah, that one. Yeah,
because it really happened and they killed people.
yeah. They killed.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Actually, the I think she just died. The character Melanie
oh,
Linsky plays. She became when she was released from prison, she became a romance story author. I think I might
oh,
be wrong. She became an author, and I don't remember if it was thrillers or romance. But either way, yeah, she's a real person. Had a real life after that.
wow, okay.
Yeah,
I would almost prefer thrillers, actually.
yeah. I can't remember. Also, well, so this Paper House is something that it's really hard to see right now. There is a foreign Blu-ray, and there is a out of print DVD. But I did look it up, and it is owned. It was produced by Vegtron and is currently owned by Lionsgate, and Lionsgate has this whole Vegtron branded uh, series of Blu-rays lately of cult movies. So like it was stuff like the Warlock movies and the Wishmaster movies. And so I have this hope that someone will grab it and put this out, because I would love to own a copy of it, just because it is hard to find. But I really think this is a special movie, and I'm afraid I'm overselling it at this point. But I just think it's a really, really special movie.
It's fun.
And sort of going into the whole childhood illness fears here, The next one was one that you picked that I had never seen, called The Halloween Tree, and this was originally
Oh
released
yeah.
in 1993, and this is sort of like recently post Nightmare Before Christmas, actually a little bit after Nightmare Before Christmas comes out as sort of a flop and builds a sort of following, and then we get stuff like Monster House and Coraline.
Yeah.
So this is sort of like this brief period just before Cartoon Network and just before that kind of thing picks up, where every Halloween you have animated movies on network television, and a lot
Mhm.
of them are like Garfield themed or something like that,
Yeah. But
or Charlie Brown themed, I guess.
this is a Ray Bradbury story,
Exactly.
and it is weird. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
gonna lie, it's a weird one.
but
Um,
I think as an animation fan, as someone who likes to look back at animation from the early '90s, which is when I was kind of old enough to appreciate things beyond them being commercials for toys. Um,
mhm.
Even the parts that don't work really remind me of what that period was like. I think it's a really good representation of lower budget, high, somebody with a low budget but a high ideals and high concepts for what they wanted to create here. Um,
Yeah, it is. I will always have kind of fond memories for Halloween Tree. It is so it's a Ray Bradbury story. It is about um a group of 5 friends who always get together and go trick or treating for Halloween. And one of their friends, who's always his name is Pip. Pip is
the
their
leader,
leader,
yeah,
the best boy, the absolute best of them, and he's always the first out the door, first past the post. Absolutely going to be the best at everything that everybody has ever done. And he was supposed to meet them at the crossroads to lead their way to Halloween, and he isn't there. And so his 4 other friends show up in Halloween costumes, and they decide, since Pip isn't there, they all run to his house to try to figure out where he is. And there's a note on his door saying that he got real sick and they are rushing him into the hospital, and that they all should go trick or treating without him.
he has
In,
appendicitis, it turns out.
it turns out that he has appendicitis, but one of them sees, I believe, sees like a shadow of Pip run towards the spooky old house at the end of the block, end of
Hmm.
the road, to old Mr. I don't remember the guy's name.
It's carapace clavicle mound shroud. We can just call
Mound
him mound
Shroud.
shroud, which is
Uh,
really a mouthful, but mound shroud.
Mound Shroud. And they're like, Pip, you're supposed to be in the hospital resting. It looks like Pip's ghost, and they find a jack-o'-lantern at Mound Shroud's house that looks like Pip,
He's kind of got a
and
tree. That's the
a
title
Halloween
Halloween tree,
tree.
is a tree of jack-o'-lanterns.
Yes. And Pip's like ghostly form climbs the tree and tries to pull the jack-o'-lantern that looks like his face off it and flies away into the night with it. And the 4 friends confront Mound Shroud, and he takes them on a journey through space and time.
Yes.
Um,
He sees an excuse to teach some lessons.
some lessons about the history of Halloween and their various costumes. The girl is dressed as a witch, um,
So
on
they
a
learn about
broom.
witch burnings.
Yep.
The child appropriate subject matter of witch burnings.
Well, she had a bike, and so her bike had she tied a broom to it so she could still ride her bike because she's a classic 50s tomboy. And so they did witch burnings and flying ointments. One of them was a mummy, so they went back to ancient Egypt. They did Dias de los Muertos.
Yeah, one of them's dressed as kind of a neon skeleton, so the
One of
let
them's just a skeleton, I think.
yeah,
And so they just did Dias de los Muertos, which is great. And one of them's dressed as a gargoyle, so they go to Notre Dame.
which is kind of the odd man out here. I get the Halloween theme to the but Hunchback of Notre Dame is not really a Halloween
Absolutely
tradition.
not. It's very funny though. It's actually the one I remember the most because basically Notre Dame is flattened because it's not built yet, and so Mount Shroud is obviously some kind of dark magician,
And he
and he
looks like the
can't.
Crypt Keeper. He
He really does. He
the
looks like a
animated
classic, either the animated Crypt Keeper or a classic vampire.
yeah,
Like big hooked nose, bulbous head, and bat
weirdly big
wings.
yeah, and weirdly big chin kind of.
Yeah,
And he's voiced by Leonard Nimoy, who's putting in the
yeah,
work.
it's just doing a great job. The thing about Notre Dame is he can't go into Notre Dame because it's a church.
Yeah.
And you're like, that isn't the first sign that Mount Shroud is just evil,
Yeah.
but it's the biggest one.
It's so funny because he's clearly like death, and not just like a good death, but like a devil death. Like he's collecting souls and shit. But he also really does want to educate these children. Like he's compelled. He's got a teacher's instinct.
He's got a
And
teacher's instinct. But like, he is definitely there for Pip's soul.
yes. And he kind of tricks the very stupid children into thinking he's going to help them
Yes.
when he really just wants their help to pacify
Chase
Pip.
down his like chase down their friend who has been hiding through history from death.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, "Oh, there's our friend." And
Yeah.
he's like, "God damn it, guys." And so they find him, and then at the end he gets Pip's soul and is like, "Great job, guys. Your friend's dead.
Yeah.
You did it."
And
And then they're all like, "Take a year off the end of our lives for the rest of Pip's."
yeah, which is a bad deal.
And
Really, Pip should live for only 4 more years, and then
yeah, but whatever.
it's a bad deal for Mound Shroud. But he seems very delighted by the idea of someone willingly giving part of their life to him. So it seems maybe it's worth it. Maybe whatever that tastes better to him if he eats the souls or whatever. I don't know.
I
Um,
guess. It
that,
is very Bradbury-y.
well, and I should say I was not into scary stuff as a kid, but I did read a lot of science fiction. And so Bradbury is actually a top thing when I think of childhood horror, because I read The Illustrated Man several times. And there are two stories in that. It's a if you don't know, Illustrated Man is a anthology of shorts, and there's one called The Velt, about kids who are obsessed with this virtual reality program of this lion Velt, and their parents think it's unhealthy for them, and very ahead of its time here. Parents think it's unhealthy and tell them they can't go to the Velt anymore, and the kids trap the parents in the Velt, and the parents are killed by the virtual reality lions. And then there's another one that scared me even more, called The Kaleidoscope, in which a spaceship explodes and the astronauts are all shot in different directions, and knowing they're going to die, sort of reflect upon their lives as long as their radios are in contact with each other. And that one was a fucking existential nightmare as a kid. Just the idea of rocketing through the blackness of space, slowly dying, and talking to your friends as they also slowly die. But the big thing he's known for is Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is not a children's book either. I should say that the Halloween Tree was a children's book. It was illustrated. Um,
Yeah. It
it
This one is definitely for kids.
it was
It
yeah
is very for children.
it
Like,
was it was a 72 book. It was illustrated, aimed at younger viewers, and and it was supposed to be educational, even though I still think the hunchback part does not fucking fit. It was meant to be educational about the
About
Egyptian
Halloween.
feast.
And like
I mean,
various
well,
things. Like about the dead.
yeah, and it's a decent primer for Samhain or Samhain, whichever you want to call it. Um, that actually was
Samhain.
when I was watching it. As soon as they got to that, I said, my memory like sparked, and I remembered you and I watching the anthology movie Trick or Treat together, and
Yeah.
how that one is sort of a lesson of Halloween. And I'm like, this is why Betsy likes this. This is just the kid version of this other thing she likes.
Yeah. I'm I'm a simple
Yeah.
creature.
I
I
mean,
know why this was. Look, I was not going to be like complicated about this.
mhm.
You asked for a child's
Yeah.
horror movie.
Well, and that's exactly what I wanted, was something I hadn't seen, and something that like was familiar but not super popular.
This is it.
I kind of want to also just mention that I don't want to be critical of the animation itself, because it was pre-digital era, and it was very prohibitively expensive to do cell work, drawn all out, and when they weren't able to digitally color it all. But it looks better than a Saturday morning cartoon from the 90s, but it's also not up to theatrical standards. But the thing that looks really nice are the painted backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you remade this animated, you would use that and try. There's the style of the illustrations in the book. The artist is Mugnine, Joe Mugnini. Fucking that one up. Anyway, his illustrations have this very specific look that make me think of children's books from the 70s and early 80s, which these days you could, partially do digitally, which I think would look really nice. So there's plenty of room to remake this one as like a 1 hour special or something. This is almost a 90-minute movie. I'm sure with ads it ran 2 hours when
Yeah,
it aired on
yeah, I think
ABC.
so. I definitely saw it on television when I saw it.
Well, it said on
'Cause-
the thing that they eventually, it got bought out by Cartoon Network, and so Cartoon Network would show it kind of regularly for a while in the early days. And
Anyway,
the score
it's
was
just
really good.
fun. Yeah.
John Debney did the score, who actually got nominated for an Oscar for Passion of the Christ, and did the early Spider-Man movies, all this stuff when Sam Raimi and Elfman were fighting. But uh, uh, for you and me, he did the score to Stonehurst Asylum, which we covered on the Asylum Horror Podcast, which was
Oh, nice.
another score that was better than the kind of low budget movie it was surrounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny that there was a tie to something old.
Delightful.
I mean, if there was an argument to be made that I should have broken down and we should have covered Something Wicked This Way Comes, but it is one of the few things Disney owns that they just didn't bother putting on Disney Plus for some reason. I think it
It's
is on YouTube, but it's not supposed to be on YouTube.
yeah. It's one of those that like we could have, but this
I'm
is a
sure
good.
it's a technically better movie than this one, but I don't know if it would be as interesting of a movie.
No,
Excuse me.
and this is I don't know. Like this is while Something Wicked This Way Comes is one of those absolutely it's a horror movie. It is not for kids in the
Yeah.
same way. And this is a children's horror movie. Like whether it is actually a horror movie or whether it's an educational movie about Halloween, but like their friend is dying.
Yeah, and there's all sorts
There
of
yeah, there is legitimate scariness in there. It is a very young child's horror movie.
yeah.
Like it is not it is about as young as you can get for a child's horror movie. But it is not because there is no the peril in it is very soft-handed.
Yes, for sure.
Um and that's the thing. That's the real problem with like kids horror is peril and terror
Yeah.
are really hard with a child's psyche.
Yeah.
And
You don't want to break them down into existential dread, and you don't want to scare them to the point where they're just crying and inconsolable.
yeah, there's a certain kind of resilience that you need
Yeah.
to be able to do horror. And it is a thing that, like, when I have tried to recommend some things to, say, my friends who have kids, I always have to dial back action or peril
Yeah.
because I don't have kids. I have younger um, relations of nieces and nephews, but like I don't live with them. I only see them occasionally. And so the idea of where that line is more distant.
Yeah.
So, not that I am completely unfamiliar with children in all ways, but it's not my everyday. So, that resilience takes time to build up. In much the same way that not everybody likes to be scared by horror movies. Children need time to be able to figure out how to bounce back in their everyday lives before they can start scaring themselves for fun.
Yeah. I was 100% not into being frightened as a child. I had anxiety issues, and I just, anything I could do to avoid being frightened, I would do up until maybe the age of like 14. Then I started to feel comfortable enough with that kind of stuff. But even though I also don't have kids, between remembering that about myself and the fact that my parents are all, and my stepmom are all in education, and my mother is especially in early childhood education, it's definitely one of those things where you just learn that it depends on the kid. And that's why stuff that's aimed at children will always be softer, and maybe your kid will be bored by that and you need to watch something a little stronger. But it all depends on the kid. I was definitely one of those kids who could not deal with it.
Are we going to talk about the littles at all?
Well, I was told that I was really frightened by the littles, and I don't remember it. So maybe it was so shocking that I punched it out of my head. But when I told my mom we were recording this, she said, "Oh, you used to be terrified of the littles," and I have very little memory of even seeing it.
Well, I actually watched the littles
Yeah,
and it is so tame. But like there's a lot of peril in it. Like it's tame but it's perilous.
yeah,
But it's not scary. Like it is. And but there are like huge spiders in the walls, and but they like just go past them.
uh huh,
But the littles themselves are the size of mice.
yeah,
And so like the spiders are proportional size. Like the littles, if you don't know, listeners, the littles are like people who live in your walls. They're also called the borrowers. They're based on a series of books. And this movie that we were talking about, maybe watching as part of this, is a family of borrowers, lives in a house. There's a boy, his family, his parents are off somewhere. It's unclear. His uncle is his guardian. He wants to move him to another house and tear his house down so a freeway can move in. um, and moves him to a big house and makes him clean all the rooms because he's a terrible person. And then the littles move into the house and there are rats and spiders in the walls. And then their parents are left behind and they're going to get squished by all the bulldozers. Oh no.
so
And it's all very like actiony.
it sounds similar to Secret of Nim, which used to scare me as a kid too.
It is very Secret of
Little
NIMH, but
people
none
in
of
peril,
the
their home about to be, well, has to be moved because it's sinking, I guess, in that case.
yeah, but none of the magic and none of the sickness.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Oh God, the sickness. God, I forgot about that's also a deal in Secret. I
yeah,
forgot about the kid, dying kid.
The reason Secret of Nim would be more horror is all of the like supernatural elements that like make everything more spooky.
And the mad
Um
scientist shit that the humans are doing to the poor little rats.
yeah,
Those
like
scenes are intense.
those are actually still spooky. Like
Yeah.
the littles it was just like it was very actiony. Like
Yeah.
they're running away from a cat
Yeah.
or they're running through a wall because a man is coming.
Yeah.
Like it's all very like Indiana Jones.
Right.
And that's intense because it's life or death peril, but that is peril and not horror. Again, where we were talking about exactly what children's horror is versus what intense children's action is with the threat of death.
And okay, and then I think that that actually is a decent segue into the last movie we were going to talk about, which
Love it.
The Haunted School, which is a Japanese horror movie from 1995. And this sort of also fills the void of the thing we weren't really covering the sort of kids adventure style scary movie. The easiest analog here would be the Goonies, but I hate the Goonies. There's Monster Squad. I feel like Monster Squad is almost aimed at adults and just happens to have children in it, but I won't get into that argument. I was looking for something that wasn't American, and I was told that this Haunted School series, which is it's a whole franchise. There's a bunch of them. Get into that later. I was told that it was a good scary movie that happened to be aimed at kids, and we started watching it, and I was a little afraid this was an actual just flat out horror movie. But then the first victim is swallowed by a CG watermelon jack-o'-lantern that's laughing. So then we're like, oh,
It was perfect.
this is for kids. Okay, we're good.
Because it was genuinely spooky.
Yeah, it was just
Like,
flat out early, like pre Ringu J horror. Like it was that period that Japanese horror was in, where it was about to blow up nation or worldwide, but it was just sort of has this dinginess to it. These movies have, it's like something that the Japanese did really well in the 90s. They just like everything looks damp, and it's not like a gothic movie where everything has cobwebs. It's like more like everything has mold on it. It's like it feels like if you touch something, your hand's gonna stick. and
yeah.
and it felt like, oh no, this is just a flat out horror movie. But then yeah, I'm
Like,
gonna run down the plot because there's not much
yeah.
of one. But there's a haunted school building that is next door to a functioning school, and one of the children, it's actually not necessarily what sets this off, but a child breaks a dogu statue, which is this sort of funerary effigy that I tried to look and have a definition, but it seems like scholars can't seem to agree if they were meant to what their purpose was. But in most horror stories, the idea is that they contain the spirits, usually of children that have died, and so they break out something out of there, and then a little girl is coaxed into the school, the haunted part of the school, and trapped, and her brothers and friends try to rescue her. And I wrote down with a mix of pluck and vague knowledge of some kind of black magic, because it just it really does feel like sort of like that Goonies logic, where some kids are just really good at certain things, and so some of these kids just know they're like obsessed with the idea of black magic, the same way some kids are obsessed with dinosaurs or Pokemon cards. Which is honestly very realistic. I'm sure there are kids like that, and it would be great if their skills could be put to use like this. So this one is a straight up scary building kind of. It's like, it's not about childhood abandonment. It's just you go into a place you're not supposed to be, which I was afraid enough of scary buildings as a kid that I never went in them, so I never had to deal with this. So this wasn't the kind of movie that would have given me nightmares as a kid. I would have been really frightened by it, but I wouldn't have been like stuck on it like I would have on Peanut Butter Solution.
Yeah. The whole like abandoned building thing where kids like go look into it seems to be a thing that happens a lot in horror movies. And I understand why, because they want kids to not go in abandoned
Yeah, it's like a
buildings.
lesson. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's that cautionary tale. Don't talk to strangers. They could be terrible ghosts that are going to make all your hair grow really long. Don't go into abandoned buildings because you might get trapped there and eaten by a spider monster.
Right.
Like,
It's not you might step on a rusty nail and then we have to rush you to the hospital to get a tetanus shot, because that doesn't scare children enough. You have to tell
no.
them that there are Ghostbuster-esque cartoon monsters that are going to attack them.
And it has to be really big and over the top, because if it's just like minorly, maybe they are going to go peek in there to see if they can see those like minorly bad,
Mm-hmm.
big, terrible monster. Yeah.
This, I mean, and this is a very fun movie that doesn't pull its punches on the scare part, but because it's children, the way the children are reacting, it remains fun, which is,
Yeah.
um again, it falls into that sort of Goonies trope where as long as it's kids reacting and they have each other and they're in a group, screaming kids in a group is not as terrifying to watch as a single kid screaming in terror because they're all alone. So,
Yeah.
and it's also like, I want to, there's a sort of a term that Sam Raimi coined called spookablast. This is a spookablast movie. It's not really jump scares, but it's just like constant wacky shenanigans. Like every room in the schoolhouse has a different weird theme to it, basically.
Yeah. Like there's a music room with a whole bunch of composers on the walls, and then there's something wacky that happens in there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember exactly what
Well,
it is, but there was something. It was something music related.
it took me back to the real Ghostbusters and the first two Ghostbusters movies, which are super mix and match with their ghosts. It's
Hmm.
like the newer Ghostbuster movie, especially the ghost, whatever they called the one with the women's. I think it was just called Ghostbusters. The ghosts in that movie were sort of homogenized. They all had a certain look to them. But like if you watch the original Ghostbusters, there's like everything from zombies and just spooky people to flat out cartoon characters, and that's
Yeah.
going on here too. And there is a lot of CG effects, but it's kind of cool because there's a sort of Slimer-esque ghost, but he's clearly a puppet that then they've superimposed using CG, and it gives him a lot of character.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's clearly supposed to be their version of Slimer. My favorite one was the room they went in where all of the sort of, what do you call them? They're like hit my mic. All the samples, like the jars full of dead frogs and shit. That stuff comes to life and attacks them.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Specimens, yes, the specimens.
The specimen room was pretty great.
And then there's also one of those visual, like those mannequins that have intestines, so you can show kids like this is your stomach, this, and those become like real, and one of the kids falls into them, which I thought was very Evil Dead-esque,
Yeah.
but maybe too gory for an American kids horror movie. But I think that you're allowed to be gross with kids horror movies as long as it's like like you can have them fall face first into guts, as long as they're not the guts of their like best friend who died screaming or something like that.
Well, also because it was in a science classroom,
Yeah,
like you know that it's not a person. Like you've got the whole like it is guts of a person, but it's a fake person. Like
yeah,
you made it enough steps removed, um, potentially. Um, Again, gross out in kids horror is okay. You just have to keep it far enough removed.
yeah.
Think about like a kid's birthday party where you peel all of those
Oh, the
grapes for
eye.
eyeballs.
Yeah, yeah. This is the witch's eyeballs. This is her hair, and yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
There's a
You have
scene
a
where,
couple of really good Japanese tropes in here that I'm not sure if you have come across these a whole lot. There's the female bikers, that the
yes,
mom is a female biker.
she's actually the older sister. I paid very close attention, and at one point they mentioned
Oh,
sister. I thought she was the mom at first too, but
okay.
she's supposed to be the older sister.
Cool. Okay.
Y-
So older sister's a basically a female biker, and
She's
kind
a
of,
juvenile delinquent.
yeah, she's a juvenile delinquent female biker, kind of part of like a motorcycle gang,
Yeah,
and works at a motorcycle shop. and the working at a motorcycle shop is kind of what takes her a step back into respectability, I think, from
Yeah.
being in like the motorcycle gang beats people up for their money kind of thing.
Right.
Which I love. I just love because she definitely was a street tough, like absolute delinquent, but they took it a step back so she's vaguely respectable because she works at a shop and answers a phone.
and
Um
and it's interesting because she's one of basically only two adults in the whole movie that are like living human beings. There's a janitor who's probably the main ghost of the thing, who's just frustrated by dirty children, and the children purposely make like they piss on the floor to get him to come back.
mhm.
And he slowly mutates into this fucking awesome bug thing throughout the movie. But there's really only two living adults, and one is this sweet goofball teacher, and then the other one is this cool girl who's a biker, and they clearly knew each other when they were kids. And the sweet teacher is really no help. He's help at the end because he is an authority figure that can like verify the children's story, but he's not particularly helpful in saving anybody. And then she actually leaves the kid on his own at one point. She says, "Well, good luck later. This is too freaky for me." uh, which was kind of shocking, but also kind of refreshing. Like, oh, okay. And she has second thoughts and comes back with her biker friends later. But it was part of me thought they were really going to end it there. Like, yeah, kids, you can't trust adults. Even your cool sister is going to ditch you and make you help yourself.
Yeah, it was pretty great. But also like, and I might have missed something, and that's fair. Um, there seemed to be something with like the teacher that he had some kind of trauma with like the kids who had been there before.
My
Like maybe the girl who originally was dead in there,
oh,
or somebody who like walked out the window. Um,
there is a dead girl trapped in there who is another trope of like the good ghost who's helping them along the way, who we're not supposed to know is a ghost. I
yeah,
I didn't think of
because
that.
like
So
the teacher walked into the room and like had a flashback
yeah, so it was
of like
when he was a
seeing,
kid. Is
yeah,
that
of
how
like,
long the girl's been in there?
yeah, of like both him seeing something and like his friend who
Hmm.
like walked out a window. And like I seem to remember him saying like that was why he became a teacher, because he wanted to help kids
Hmm.
like have a better experience than he did. I might be adding some stuff to this movie. I don't remember at this point. It's been a couple of weeks. Um
Well,
but like
I mean,
but she
she does
definitely was
befriend.
around and she befriended everybody there.
Yeah, she's really close with one boy in particular who then has to deal with the fact that she can't come with them when they
Mhm.
escape. Which
And
is definitely something that happens in a lot of these stories.
yeah, and he was like, "Why did she like me more than everybody else? I now have to deal with this."
Hmm.
And I'm
Yeah,
like, "Have fun with therapy, kid."
yeah. But
Uh,
most of it is like cockroach man who's screaming at them to stop running in the halls. Most of it's very silly,
it's
and
super silly and fun, and then like
but shot seriously.
five
Like,
very shot very seriously, and then also like 5% there's actually a lot of trauma going on.
yeah.
So, uh, fairly standard Japanese movie,
Well, I
actually.
think it's my guess, and I don't know for sure. To me, it seems like it's in reference to the yokai monster movies from the '60s. It just is a little juicier than those. Um,
Mm.
and the idea, like they kept on making those movies. Like Takashi Miike, actually, that was one of his first family films he made, was a remake of Yokai Wars. But like the idea that there are sort of friendly and not so friendly misfit demons trapped inside everyday objects. And there's just so many kinds of demons and ghosts in Japanese lore that you can just have a smorgasbord of weirdos in your kids movie. It felt like it was in reference to that. And then it's not as non sequitur as Hauzu, some listeners might have seen that because that got a Criterion release, but it has that sort of episodic quality that movie has, where it's just one thing after another. Hold on, what?
What you're saying is kind of like a representation of Pompoko, where the things are coming to life during the
Yes,
birthday.
there is in Pompoko they have the yokai stuff and the demons. Yes, the Studio Ghibli movie Pompoko has some of that. And it also reminds me of there's a Shinya Tsukamoto movie called Hiruku the Goblin, which is 100% an adult. Like it's from the guy. It was the first mainstream movie that the guy who did Tetsuo the Iron Man ever made, but it takes place on a school ground with people hunting goblins and demons, and so it was a lot like that too. So I'm wondering if that might have inspired it, because that was based on a manga, and I this one wasn't directly based on a manga, but it did turn into, it had 3 sequels and a 20 episode animated series, and from 2000 to 2001.
Hmm.
So it definitely falls in with I mean, there's a whole, something I haven't really explored very much. There's another movie called Snake Girl and the Silver Haired Witch that is also based on a sort of horror comic for kids that has this sort of, again, that spookoblast is the thing I'm coming up with. There's this whole genre of Japanese movies that are sort of aimed at kids but not entirely aimed at kids, that are based on manga.
I
um
mean, if we start going into like horror manga, we're gonna be here all day.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely like its own thing, and it's something I haven't really looked into that much, so I'm no kind of expert on. But there's this sort of like subgenre of kids kids horror manga that was very big in like the 60s and 70s, and it's different than what we have now. It's not as terrifying as what we have now, or even the stuff they had in the 90s. But the going to the schoolyard thing is watching so much Japanese media. As an American, there is this sort of comfort in how standardized Japanese schools are,
Mm-hmm.
that sets off this sort of nostalgia, even though I've never even been to Japan, let alone gone to school in Japan. But it's sort of like seeing the kids in this environment. It's like Showa era Godzilla movies or episodes of Ranma One Half. Like I'm very familiar with where they're at, and I appreciate in this movie that they're able to take a very familiar setting that's familiar even to me as an outsider, and subvert it with all sorts of weird, wacky claymation and early CG and monster costumes and stuff.
Yeah, it definitely watching it, like as somebody who is a huge like fan of survival horror games
Mm-hmm.
and various things like that. Silent Hill in particular,
It's
and
Silent Hill for kids in a much smaller location.
yeah, and like not only just Silent Hill, but like the Siren series and various other things.
What's
Like
the one that's based on Argento's Phenomenon with the scissor guy?
um Clock Tower.
Yes, yes.
But like seeing like the schoolhouses and the various things, and just like knowing the kind of beats, um and seeing like the very children level of like horror comedy kind of stuff going on in there with this movie. It was fun in a lot of really neat ways. Just kind of like seeing that kind of playfulness in there was good.
Yeah.
It is very funny, like as we had been watching like all of these, we definitely were trying to watch some stuff that wasn't, mainstream. Like we didn't go into the Goosebumps movies or
Yeah.
things like that were like definitely kids horror series, like
How,
especially the 90s really like leaned into that. um
and there've been the bigger budget Goosebump movies, and there was House with a Clock on the Walls is another one I haven't seen.
Yeah,
There's
Bel Air's, and I wouldn't have minded like seeing actually how that went, but I doubt that they actually leaned into horror with that. Bel Air's the book actually would have more scares in it, but with Jack Black and various things, my guess is they went more action with it.
Mhm.
But
Well, it
um
is Eli Roth, so it might have been.
it might have been.
Yeah, I think the only horror book I ever read as a kid is I read I bet Bunnicula and the sequel How Old A.N.
I read
Which
all of the
technically there is a
Bunnicula books.
Bunnicula made for TV movie. I've never seen it, but
Yeah, it is so hard. We like Gabe and I talked about like did we think that we had any like large blind spots in our kids horror genre? And probably
I'm
we're probably going to release this and be like, "Oh, there was something we super
yeah.
miss."
The easy thing about it is they didn't make a lot of kids horror that wasn't just short cartoons until the 80s and late 70s and 80s. There's just not that much of it. So that did help narrow it down a bit.
But a lot of it is because you're getting is you're either getting action that the peril becomes horrific, or you're getting some kind of horror movie with a kid protagonist that is actually for adults.
Right. Which
Um,
which is a subgenre I very much appreciate. It's just not what we really wanted to cover here. Yeah,
and like
like I
a
said, I
lot,
would love to do something about the sort of Alice in Wonderland, taking that model and turning it into horror movies is a really interesting
I
idea
mean,
to me.
I would be happy to, do a portal fantasy, a portal horror.
What was Mirror Mask? Was that the name of the?
Mirror Mask is the Neil Gaiman one, yeah.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman. Yeah. All right. Well, the last thing on a haunted school is I looked into it, and this one, episodes 1, 2, and 4 were directed by Hideyuki Hirayama, but Shizuki Kaneko did number 4 or number 3. So I kind of want to see that because he's the guy behind the really good 90s reboot of Gamera, the best millennia era Godzilla movie, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. But he also directed the non-Netflix live action version of Death Note, which was, I think, technically 2 movies, and then they made another one that was in between, cool, which are surprisingly very good. I don't know
Huh.
if you've ever seen those. Uh,
I I think I saw. Yes, no, I did see those.
I quite like those, and I really like his aesthetic. So I think I might have to search for Haunted School number 3 in the meantime. And then yeah, I didn't really make a list of other ones I wanted. I really Paperhouse and Peanut Butter Solution were the 2 I most wanted to talk about. So I didn't exactly make a list of other kind of underrated children's horror movies to share at
I
the
mean,
end here.
I'm gonna say watch Little Monsters.
Yeah,
I
well,
realized that Gabe poo poos it because it's gross and he's a whiny baby.
I just remember it being really annoying.
I mean, it is. It's Howie Mandel.
But what's
He's an
interesting
annoying
is
person.
it's like almost the same plot as Monsters Inc., if I remember
It
right, which
is.
is really interesting because everybody was always about how original Monsters Inc. was, and it was like, no, there was this much lower budgeted kids movie with Fred Savage and Howie Mandel that's kind of the same idea minus the Inc. part, minus the
It's
corporate
also
part.
like Fred Savage's like huge movie dominion of
Peak
the
Savage,
80s.
Peak Savage, same era as
Yes.
the Wizard and the Wonder Years
He was
before.
in so many
Yeah,
things for a while. Okay, I am going to give for people who don't know, Little Monsters is this movie where like Fred Savage finds out that there is a kingdom of monsters underneath the bed, and his under the bed monster has to scare him to get energy or whatever, and he gets pulled into the underbed world, and his monster gets in trouble for letting him know that monsters are there, and he starts to become a monster.
which that's the part I remember being kind of good, is that Fred Savage slowly turning kind of into a monster. I remember that
And
part.
like it has body horror and gross out stuff, and like the thing about it is like it's annoying because Howie Mandel is like peak 80s annoying gross out comedy. Um but like Fred Savage does the whole you start making friends with somebody who is a bad influence on you and you start to be a jerk to people, and like it turns you into a worse person, and then you start to be a monster, quote unquote. And then it changes who you are as a person, and then you can't go back to who you used to be, is like the whole horror story part of it.
Which is another part of adolescence, is sometimes you grow up to be an asshole.
It is a puberty metaphor.
Yeah.
Like, that is the one thing about horror movies that we didn't really cover, is like the early, hey, sup, puberty's gonna happen, it's gonna suck.
Yeah.
And maybe you should be on the lookout for how your body's changing.
Yeah.
That's a thing that comes up in horror movies, and especially during the 80s.
Yeah.
It happened a lot more in like girl-based horror movies.
Right.
Or like
Carrie and Ginger Snaps are both about adolescent female puberty, for sure.
Yeah. But like so many of those like just get spun up into adult things, because anytime puberty happens, then it's girls getting tits, and then it turns into sexy. Yeah. Anyway, so throw my hands up, gender and sexuality politics up the wazoo. So
yeah, that sort of I feel like adolescent horror is almost its own subject, and that some of these movies we covered are like right on, especially Paperhouse is right on the verge of being adolescent horror. But adolescent horror is usually R-rated, just in general. And Lost Boys is adolescent horror too, from a boy point of view.
The real thing is, so much of the like you're an adult now horror, loss of innocence stuff, almost all of that is adults reflecting back on being kids. And all of that is the like longing nostalgia horror, rather than horror for kids is like adults looking at what scares kids, which is losing your parents, being sick, all of those things that you're anticipatorily afraid of, not things that you are only afraid of because you realize that they have been done to you.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
I like it.
Let's ship it.
So, well, tell the people where they can find you. And
I mean, I would say you can find me on Twitter, but like, who knows when Twitter's going to be gone?
It's barely functioning. Yeah.
Yeah. The best place probably you can find me is Tumblr. We still have your favorite monster Tumblr at Tumblr. And that's probably the best place you'll find wherever what new happens episodes. To that's where we put our new episodes. You can find me on Twitter as long as it's around, and I'll put wherever I'm going there, Avatar of Chaos at Twitter. And other than that, just kind of, I don't know, shout into the sky, I'll probably find you.
Okay, cool. Yeah. As usual, I am at Genre Grinder Twitter, Genre Grinder Facebook. There's now Genre Grinder Gabe on Instagram, which was my attempt to find something other than Twitter to put reviews on. And you can reach me at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter, again, for now. And I am still working on reviews. They kind of sent me a whole bunch of discs recently, so I'm going to try to finish all that. Now that Betsy and I have recorded, I will stop watching horror movies for children and watch whatever the hell crazy shit they just sent me in the mail. I don't really have it until next time, so I guess until next time, beware of the horrors of adolescence and
look under your bed. There could be little monsters under there.
Under your bed, in your closet. You never know. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye.